Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Black. I'm a conductor and composer, and I am joined here by Andrew Carroll, who is a dancer and I believe the head of the dance department at University of South Florida. Or
Well, clarification, I'm the head of the ballet program, not the head of the whole. We've got a very big program. So if there's modern, there's ballet. I kind of head the ballet part.
great.
So yeah.
Thank you for the clarification, and welcome to this conversation. And I thought it would be interesting. This past weekend, I had the opportunity to conduct my first ever Nutcracker ballet with the full production from the pit. And I thought it would be interesting to talk and compare, the two different sides of that, because ballet is a collaboration between the orchestra in the pit and the dance company on the stage. And you've done the stage, and I've done the pit, and I thought it'd be interesting to kind of compare and contrast our experiences. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to do this.
So tell me, Andrew, just a little bit, for the people watching, a little bit about your background and your experience with the Nutcracker, or just with ballet in general.
Sure. I was a soloist with the now called Philadelphia Ballet. When I was with it, they were the Pennsylvania Ballet, obviously in Philadelphia. I was really super lucky in that when I joined the company, literally my first year, which is kind of a little bit unheard of, I was given the no pun intended, the plum role of Sugar Plum in the Nutcracker, which is for the men, that's one of just about the lead role that you can have. And I think I danced that role literally every year, save one when I was injured. And I almost hesitate to say it because so many people cringe. I loved doing it. I mean, it was a very different experience for the guys than it is for the women. The women oftentimes have to carry a huge load. There are so many scenes that require so many dancers that the women seem to have to do the snow scene, the flowers scene, party scene, this scene, that scene. And I had to do Sugar Plum. I had to just be very quiet in the wing, just like happily awaiting that like incredible music that is the Nutcracker, especially for the score for the Sugar Plum is particularly pretty. And, all kind of ties in with this time of the year, holiday, and you see the families out front, in the audience that are all expectant and, kind of looking forward to seeing the show. So I always really looked forward to it, and I always enjoyed it a lot. So I'm super excited that you got to do it for the first time, that you got to experience. I mean, I don't know how it was in Buffalo where you did it, but there's kind of an energy that surrounds that moment when the lights finally go down, and backstage we hear the stage director say "Places, please," and you realize this is it. And then there's this hush that happens in the audience, and that was always such an incredible moment when all of a sudden then the curtain lifts. It's like you're being revealed into this magic world, and the music starts, and it is such an incredible moment for anybody who is participating in the performing end of it, be it the dancers, the musicians, whatnot. All of a sudden, that expectant moment when there it is,
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's quite a production. I mean, you've got a lot of dancers involved, with the different scenes. You've got all the mice that come in the battle scene. You've got soldiers, you've got snowflakes, you've got flowers, you've got a bunch of soloists in the second half doing various characteristic dances, the divertissement. You've got the principal dancers, as you mentioned, the Sugar Plum, the pas de deux in the first act, and the whole pantomime scene, the party scene that opens up the ballet. So it's quite a complicated show, I would say. And in our case, I don't know if this is always done, but they had like a couple of cannons backstage, and that shot cheese, big pieces of
Correct.
cheese.
Yeah. Yeah.
and um, and of course, the orchestra is also not small either. So the orchestra's got a big part. Yeah, it was, and you're absolutely right. There's a special energy, I think, to the beginning of the show, and the hall that we were playing in seats about 3,500 people, more or less, which is a
Yes.
huge hall. That's about almost twice as many as the concert halls in Tampa when I was there. Um, and it was apparently sold out or very nearly sold out. So
Well,
there's a lot of people.
that for most companies, I don't know that people realize this, but Nutcracker is such a beneficial fund funding source for a lot of times, a lot of the rest of your year, only because the beauty of it is it incorporates so many children within the cast, and each child is going to have parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and teachers and neighbors and all that, who all are going to buy a ticket. And therefore, it does tend to do very well. And because it's now somehow become kind of a staple of the holiday season, every city has a Nutcracker, or many do. That you're going to sell out. Generally, a lot of times, or have a very full house. People a lot of times are looking for some kind of family event to do, or some kind of holiday event to do, and to celebrate the season. And in many families, it's become a tradition, just like you put up a tree, or you go caroling, or you go looking at houses that have lights on it. You go to the Nutcracker. It's just one of those things that kind of slid into, well, this is what we do every year. And so you tend to get a big audience. What you didn't mention, another thing that is really kind of special, beyond the entire huge cast and whatnot, a lot of times the sets and the scenery are like really extensive. Like in our production, and for those of you that are familiar, on a stage, you have those curtains, we call them wings, that you come in and out of, your entrances and exits. Well, for the Nutcracker, those usually they're the color of the theater. Usually, they're usually black, of to mask. Uh, in our company, those got replaced by, they were these panels that were literally like ribbon candy that had been painted on panels. So each one of those entrances and exits was just candy all the way across, because the second act is quote unquote Land of the Sweets, which is where the heroine of the Nutcracker travels to in the storyline of the ballet.
And we
And
mean heroine as in the young female protagonist, not
correct. Yeah, she's the present at the beginning, and she wraps it up at the end. It's kind of her journey through first act of going through a scene through her eyes, the party scene and the battle scene and the snow scene, and then she travels to this mythical Land of the Sweets, ruled over by Sugar Plum Fairy and her cavalier. And the all of it was just, the backdrop too was candy or ice cream, or like, it was like, that board game Candyland. I mean,
yeah.
I always thought about it was like going into Candyland. I mean, it was just like a giant version of it, no matter where you looked. And all, like you mentioned, literally there is such detail to all the costumes. They are so constructed, literally sometimes for years. And they can actually be a good thing, and they can also be a bad thing from a
Yeah.
dancer's perspective. So
Well, and something that, like the production that we did in Buffalo, and I think this is common for most places that do the Nutcracker, is that they kind of have a production that they do, and with maybe a few changes here and there, that they're basically doing a similar production each year. So like some of those costumes, some of those sets might have been used many, many years in a row.
the funny thing about that is that when I joined, they had done some major fundraiser in our company, and they were bound to get a whole brand new production, everything, costume sets, everything the following year. But the year I joined, we were still using the old ones. And we loved the old costumes because they were old and fit like a glove. They were all broken in. The new costumes were very stiff. They were very elaborate. The men had, the sugar plum had fruit, candy jeweled fruit that went up the sleeves of your arm. But when you're working with a woman, when you're partnering her, you need kind of freedom. And suddenly there was this fear that I'm going to nick her the wrong way and fruit's going to fly on the stage. And her tutu had fruit on it, like big jeweled apples and oranges and all that. Like it was like we weren't expecting that. And they were also kind of stiff. And for the men, they were very tight and very high. And it was like, oh, we just wanted the, like you mentioned, those old ones that had been around for like a bazillion years that were just comfy, fit like a glove, had no fruit on them. Yeah. People, and a lot of times the audience, they don't, not that they, I don't know why they would think of that, but they don't necessarily think of that. And, I don't even know how you all feel. I always, when I look down into the pit, everyone is so formal in like usually really formal attire, the men were, for literally every show, like sometimes tuxedo for like every show. I'm like, God, they must be so uncomfortable. Like the violinists that are like, you need freedom and you to be all constricted with a tuxedo. Yeah.
Well, I mean, musicians do, often or at least commonly perform in tuxes. So yeah, it's our sort of standard uh, concert clothes. So I think for example, like I've got a tux that I had custom made because I wanted it to have like freedom of motion. So it's got a lot better, you know, like cut than what you would typically find at a store. But in fact, in Buffalo, we just wore all black, and I think it kind of depends on the orchestra and the tradition. But in our case, it was all black, which gives you a lot more comfort. You can just kind of wear what's comfortable. And
An interesting question on that. Ballet companies now are trending a lot of times to update and to become a little more modernized. Just now, when you said that you were just wore all black versus wearing the tuxedo, is that happening a little more commonly, or was this just that a random particular case that you did not have to wear a tux?
well, I think in it's common. It's been common for quite a while, I would say, to wear all black in the pit because you're not really in view of the audience, and so it's a little bit more relaxed. But actually, there is definitely a movement recently to sort of update the concert clothes because tuxedos, 100 years ago, that was like the thing you wore when you go out to any kind of, if you go out to dinner at a restaurant or something. That's not the case anymore, obviously. And so, actually, speaking of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Orchestra, I think it was last year or maybe it was 2 years ago, they actually officially abolished tuxedos from the concert stage. And they decided to go with, I guess they went with all black. I'm not exactly sure what their dress code is now, but it's more contemporary and more up to date. And I think this is actually a great idea for orchestras because you want to be relatable to the people that are in the audience, and it's great to, um, I feel like having a tux kind of creates a little bit of a mental barrier between you and the people watching, especially if they're not used to going to orchestra concerts and they don't know that tradition. They might find that a little overly stiff. I imagine it's a little different with ballet, just because I mean, we all know about the tutus and everything, but I mean that's traditional. Is there a particular reason why you have wear this kind of attire when you're dancing?
Tradition, basically. Although, you know what, I'm so, to be honest with you, I'm so happy we live in the era we live in because everything is just like that. These kind of adaptations or agreed upon and allowed permissible updates, I think they're just really necessary because, you know, you want the, like you said, the audience to relate to, you know, a lot of ballet now is done in a lot of pedestrian clothes. And I think people really appreciate seeing movement, or the beauty of the dance form, be it ballet or contemporary or whatever genre you want, not necessarily so out of reach. You know, I mean, yeah, certainly there's certain ballets like the Nutcracker or you know, your Swan Lake or your other biggies that, you know, you have to kind of wear traditional clothes, although even those are getting updated. And I think that the fascination is they sell tickets because people want to see the new version, the more contemporized version. You know, even the storyline gets tinkered with a little bit here and there to update it and make it a little more relatable to the audience, which I think is super important, you know, and interesting as well to see what so and so has done with the story and how that seen through that lens, I think is super interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting how you can, you know, how you can emphasize different parts of the story, or you can create a little bit different dramatic arc just if you reorder some of the music, you know, or if you know, if you change the interpretation a little bit. Um, yeah, and I would say, you know, like it's always that fine line because the tradition is great, and you know, and there's like this sort of like classic Nutcracker that we all think of, or classic Swan Lake. You know, it's hard to imagine Swan Lake like updated.
I
But on the
know.
other hand, the danger there is that it can get kind of stale if you do it the same exact way decade after decade. You know, so
You know, I teach history, ballet history, and that's part of what I teach in our curriculum. What I keep trying to and tell my dancers is that I think what's important is to give people a choice. You know, that it's never just one way or just another way, that there are many different avenues and there's many different perspectives. And for audiences also to see a this and a that, you want that and they can bounce off of one another. And you can oftentimes, you know, this is so stupid. I usually buy chocolate ice cream. I love chocolate ice cream, but you know, you get tired of it after a while. So, you know, you want another flavor, you buy another flavor for like a week or a minute, and then you go back to the, you know, the original. You know, people need that kind of update or traditional because they may prefer one or the other, but every now and then you get curious or just need a break and need a, you want us something else, you know.
yeah.
When you were doing the Buffalo production, you know, it's funny that you say I don't often associate drama or dramatic, but I guess some of the music is pretty dramatic. And you know, the Sugar Plum actually is, it's, I always thought it was just beautiful, but it's also, there are moments in it that are halfway through the main duet that are, they are pretty dramatic. There's big, you know, crescendos and whatnot. Um,
Well, I think that's one of the wonderful things about Tchaikovsky as a composer and about this piece, you know, is that um, in another composer's hands, you could imagine this being very sort of trite and kitschy and kids, you know, like kids sort of music without any real depth to it. But Tchaikovsky always has depth. There, you know, there's always like deep emotions that he can dive into, and so and you get a good taste of that at the end of the first act when you have the first pas de deux, which snow pas, I believe, is what people refer
yeah,
to it as,
correct.
where you know the principal dancers appear for the first time, often at least, and then it leads into the waltz of the snowflakes that kind of rounds off the first act, and that's all I think incredibly dramatic music and very beautiful, very heartfelt. And similarly, the pas de deux at the end, the sugar plum scene. Um, this is kind of a famous thing. I did a video on this actually recently, where Tchaikovsky. The story goes that Tchaikovsky got a bet with a friend. You know, could he make a melody just using a scale, just simple scale that's descending? And And he did, and he wrote this glorious music that is just absolutely passionate and heartfelt. But it's also just a G major scale descending.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
It's a
Interesting.
little bit of a legend. I don't know if that actually happened or not, but that's the story. Um, and likewise, he also at about the time he was composing that, his sister died. So you know there was that layer to it as well. Um, and I think the structure of talking about the drama or the story of the Nutcracker, it's the structure of it is kind of interesting because the first half of this ballet is very very narrative. So you can really follow the story of Clara or Marie, who she's got this godfather, Drosselmeyer, the inventor, who brings these amazing mechanical dolls, and the Nutcracker, and gives it to her, and then she has this party with her parents, and this whole scene. Then she falls asleep and starts to imagine, or maybe some kind of magic is happening, that she's shrunk down to very small size, and that she is or the toys, the Nutcrackers, in a battle with the mice of the household and the king of the mice, and so there's this sort of like fantastical, dramatic story that is very prominent in the first half, and then the funny thing is, though, in the ballet, it's like the second half has almost none of that. It's just kind of like a series of dances. It's
I
like,
know. Well, I'm guessing that Petapon Ivanov, who are the choreographers for it, you just within a lot of ballets, you have to sort of plug in parts for dancers. You've got this dancer that has this skill that is amazing with this that might, be favorable for the Spanish section. And then you've got this dancer that it might be an amazing jumper. Well, then you create a section of like to Russian Trepak music that is the Russian section, or the candy cane section, sometimes it's called, so I have a feeling they probably just catered to the dancers that they had at hand and made work for them, and just made a land of the sweets. Although, it's always been curious to many of us that were dancing it, like why there necessarily had to be a land associated with a sweet. Like it was always Spanish hot chocolate, or
right.
Arabian coffee, or Chinese tea, or French marzipan. But why couldn't it just been hot chocolate or tea? They could just be that versus a country, associated with it. Not
Yeah.
sure why that happened, but that happened. And, there's a lot of controversy with that now, because a lot of companies feel that a lot of the dances are a little bit of a misappropriation. So a lot of companies are, again, as we talked earlier, updating the Nutcracker to make it more culturally appropriate, which I think is so important in this day and age. And some of the changes that they've made are just really good and have brought the level of inclusivity and diversity really up within the ballet. A lot of things that people don't don't think about with the Nutcracker when they go buy their ticket and they go for their tradition, to go see it, and just so much. I mean, I don't know that the audience even realizes too. Companies start Nutcracker in September. They start rehearsing Nutcracker usually September, October. That far, it takes that volume of amount of time to put this baby on, because it is just, like you said, a lot of scenes, which also have a lot of children, and to corral and to teach and to perfect the kids. God bless the people that are in charge of the children and rehearsing them, because they have to be patient and kind yet thorough, and all that. So, and some of the kids, they're really little. Those little mice and the little, I don't know, our version, some of the little soldiers, they're really little,
Yeah.
and they come ready, and they, to the best of their ability, but you can't help, one of them is off in the corner doing somersaults somewhere, like it can't be found at, at the 11th hour, and they're supposed to be in line in formation, and there's some in some hallway doing somersaults or something. Yeah.
I have to say the kids that I was working with in Buffalo did such a good job, and they were they were the mice. They were also in the party scene, and like you said, they were tiny. I don't know what the age range
Yeah.
is, but I would say less than 10 for sure.
Oh yeah, a lot of them sometimes are like 8.
Yeah, and there's also the angels scene at the beginning of Act Two, which
They're really little.
yeah, the smallest ones, and they did a great job, and yeah, it must have taken a long time to teach and to learn, and it was funny too, or for me, you mentioned all this like sort of young energy and the doing somersaults in the hallway and stuff. It's like when they were on stage, when they were doing their thing, they were absolutely great. But then like in rehearsal, like the minute that the rehearsal ended, they would be just talking away in the corner.
Wild.
Yeah, just going kind of nuts. And
Wild. I mean, like wild energy because A, they're excited, and B, they're on stage, to all of a sudden be on that big stage with like seats and music and all that. It's like a huge experience, and so
yeah.
they can't contain it. But
Did you ever do a mouse when you were very small?
no, when I was growing up and dancing, the school and company that I was first with, they did not do Nutcracker, and that was one of the reasons that I actually left. I was with company the Ohio Ballet. It's no longer in existence, but I wanted to do a Nutcracker. I saw everywhere else people doing it, and I just wanted to do it. I didn't, I never dreamed that I would do like Sugar Plum, which is just that's a really, for a lot of companies, you have to wait, pay your dues and wait your turn to do that role. Yeah, I just was, I'm so grateful that I did it right away and did it again every year until the one year that I was injured. But
So why don't you talk a little bit about that? So I mean, you got to do the Sugar Plum right away, but
yeah.
talk a little bit about the sort of progression through a ballet company and what you might what like a typical dancer might dance a number of these different roles in the
Absolutely.
Nutcracker as they get more experienced. So
If you enter into the company generally if you're a woman, you might do, if you're younger, you'll do the party scene for sure. If you are an adult and you're not one of the children and you're a company member, you might do an adult in party scene, not one of the children, and then quickly run backstage and redo your hair to come back out to do Snow, which is a white tutu and a different kind of hairstyle than party scene where you're a human being at a parent at a party. The men generally, if they do party scene, they might come back and do, because they have little mice and they have big mice generally.
yeah.
A lot of the men might do some of the big mice. And then Act Two, there's an intermission, and in Act Two, all of those divertissements that happen utilize a lot of dancers. So women will always do the marzipan. Women will always do something in the Chinese tea, as will usually one man. Spanish is usually a mix of men and women. They formerly called it Arabian. I'm not sure what it's being called now. That was always usually a duet between a man and a woman, or just a woman's solo. Then there's Waltz of the Flowers, which there's a lot of women flowers, and sometimes they incorporate a character called Dewdrop Fairy within there, which is a big role for a woman. And a dancer might, I know dancers that went and knocked on our director's door every year. Kind of, is this the year maybe I can understudy or learn Dewdrop? And either it was a yay or an A, because that was a coveted role, as was Sugar Plum. And I knew a lot of dancers also were knocking, asking, could they learn or do Sugar Plum? I knew one really gutsy woman who she was not cast in any way for Sugar Plum, but she was insistent, and she yanked this poor guy who also was not doing it, made him rehearse with her so they could show the director. They came to every rehearsal and stood in the back and did it in the back, and he still did not.
Oh man.
But she was bound and determined that she was going to put herself right there to let him see her do this role every opportunity she could, that she was doing it, learning it. There's nothing to stop anybody from learning anything, but actual being cast in it is a little bit of a different story. So yeah.
It's tough to get that break, right? That's it. In music as well. There's people are preparing for auditions and trying to get managers and agents to notice them, or orchestra arts
Right.
events. And
I don't know that people know this too. Like when you're part of a big company, and if you are lucky enough to do Sugar Plum, a lot of times you are contacted by smaller companies, schools, anywhere in the country, asking you to, could you come and guest perform with them? And it can be super financially nice because they generally pay well, and they fly you in, they put you up, you perform with them, they hand you a nice little paycheck, and you go home and do the rest of yours in your home city, and you have a really nice Christmas
yeah,
capability of not, your credit card is not that overloaded because you've had this little surplus that, you were benefited by guesting. So that was also a nice thing, very much in doing that role, because it's done so much around the country. They need sometimes a lead couple to come in and do that role.
yeah.
So,
Well, and not every city has the professional ballet company
right.
to do those kind of roles. A lot of places. I mean, even in Buffalo, I'm actually not sure exactly where all the dancers came from, because I know some of them at least, and the Sugar Plum and Cavalier for sure were joining us from Denver.
Hmm.
Um, and I think some of the corps de ballet was also coming in from elsewhere, some of the soloists, but I'm actually not sure. I probably should have asked that question of them.
Well, the problem with the Sugar Plum with anybody local or Snow, if some versions have a duet with Snow and some versions don't. Um, the problem with that is you need a guy who understands how to partner, to lift, to hold the woman on point, to turn. And a lot of local schools, a lot of the men don't have that skill. It's a skill that you have to learn, and it takes years, because when a woman goes on point, she's on her, you have to learn how to balance her and you have to hold her up. She can't just stay there on her own. And to be able to maneuver her, to look right, to lift her. Lifting is, oh, here's this. I was doing Sugar Plum with, usually in our company, you get paired with someone that you'll be paired with the entire run, and there were probably five of us couples that did that role, because like Philadelphia Ballet does it, they're doing it now already, and they'll do it until New Year's Eve. And there's sometimes 3 shows a day. So, there are 5 couples that keep alternating that role. And my partner, Leslie, and I, we had done it so many times. We had done many ballets together. We knew each other like the back of a book. We knew how to work together so beautifully. Well, we were alerted that the performance that night that we were doing, the media was coming, some news channel. They wanted to do footage for, and it's no big deal. Well, uncharacteristically, something went really bad at the very end of that duet. There's this big, lots of, it just builds and builds and builds. And usually the guy throws the woman up and catches her, and then they let go. Leslie went before I was ready. Either she was early or I was late. I'm not sure. But I didn't have, usually a man lifts a woman using her inertia when she jumps, and you join in and push with your legs and you throw her up in the air. But I wasn't prepared, and she went. So I caught just dead weight. I had a human being holding him. I couldn't throw this human being into the air because I had no inertia. And somehow she realized I wasn't going to throw her. So she wrapped her legs around my body, somehow like some I Love Lucy scene. And we just kind of cheesily like finished with our hands. And that's what they showed on the news. I mean, of all things, they had the entire duet to show. And of course, that is what got put on, was plastered all over the news. I mean, it was just, yeah. So there's that,
Yeah, well, that's Murphy's Law, right? I mean, that's just the way it goes. And
Yeah.
that must be, a very impressive part of ballet dancing, for audience and those of us who haven't done it, is that partner dancing, where you do those kind of aerials and those kind of really complicated and I guess even dangerous, if you don't do it
Yes.
properly,
Yeah.
moves.
The snow that you were talking about, the Philadelphia Ballet always does the Balanchine version that New York City Ballet does. We were a satellite company from New York City Ballet. So we did all of their rep. We did their version of Nutcracker, which does not have a snow duet. But the first year I joined, Pennsylvania Ballet, or Philadelphia Ballet now, started this thing for 2 years where they had a joint venture with the city of Milwaukee, where we would spend time in Philadelphia and then time in Milwaukee performing. And half of us were sent to Milwaukee one year for the Nutcracker, but they did another version of Nutcracker that had a snow duet. So some of us had to learn the snow. And within there's something called the bird, which the guy has to go at the edge of the stage, right in front of the pit with all the musicians at his back. He has to kneel down. The woman is facing him. She comes running down, and she goes on her stomach. You have to take her on her hip bones and put her up above your head. So she's actually over the pit.
Wow.
And if you don't get her in the right place on the hip bone, she's like a teeter-totter.
Yeah.
And I saw so many dancers go one way and get caught, or another way and get caught in the last minute before they would have either gone in the pit or landed on the stage on their head. I mean, it's a really snarky lift that just girls used to cry in our company because if they had to do that lift or that the snow scene with that in it, because also when you're on stage, there's all these lights and the audience is kind of black. You can't see anything. You can sort of see the musicians below and you're just going into blackness. And if you're teeter-tottering, you just worry that 911 is going to be called, imminently. So
wow. Yeah, that would be stressful for the.
it was really stressful for the guys too. You just kind of, said a little prayer as you're waiting there. It just momentarily, she's going to come running at you, and you better grab her in the right place, because ultimately, it's not going to be her fault.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah, and I imagine that if that ever didn't work out and they got launched into the pit, it would go right at the conductor. That's
Oh yeah, you take out the conductor, so the whole thing would be over with. Like
the entire thing's over. Yeah,
the whole thing would be over with. Like not even halfway through the ballet, because
yeah,
that would have happened. Yeah, that would not have gone well. Audiences don't realize too. You go to a ballet and you see this tutu, and they have no idea. We have to practice in them in the studio, like usually the entire rehearsal run, because you've got about this much stiff material that you're basically, there's something in, but you can't get to the woman to hold her on balance other than being here, but you can't really do it well here. Not to mention the fact that anything that goes on the shoulder, you've got this net like all in your face continually, and the net, it's scratchy, and I used to literally break out in hives looking at that thing, and dancers who sweat a lot anyway, I had to do every rehearsal like in a turtleneck, because if that netting touched me, I broke out in a rash like immediately. It's like people don't really, they say, oh, what a beautiful tutu. I'm like, yeah, what a beautiful tutu, but you don't know, you
So
know.
leading the revolution for a new concert attire, new
Yes,
attire.
exactly. That'll never happen, but well, it'll happen to some degree, but yeah, not for probably Sugar Plum.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned a little while ago about how long it takes to prepare
Hmm.
the whole Nutcracker, and how that's pretty much the whole autumn is taken up.
Correct.
Learning the different scenes. Um, on the converse side, if we go into the pit for a little while, the orchestra has to put that together very fast, and
No doubt.
it's one of those things where you know. Um, Well, it's a combination of you're always trying to find ways to economize, right? And an orchestra rehearsing, professional orchestra rehearsing is expensive. Every player in the orchestra, 75 people or something, is getting paid for that, and so you have to be super super efficient with that. And the musicians, they're not going to get to play that. Also, because it's so popular, I mean, those musicians have all played it millions of times. Collectively, I'm sure there were tens of thousands of performances in the pit that I was working with in terms of experience. Um, but that makes it kind of a challenge too, from the conducting standpoint. I went into this and I didn't have like a whole week to like hone and refine and really work. Basically, I had to really know what the tempos were for the dancers before I got there, because there was no time. I mean, there was time for like maybe one note here and there to
Hmm.
adjust. But basically, we had to do it. We had enough time to do it twice through, and that was it.
You know, you and I had a few conversations on that prior to the little talk session. Did any of the dancers have requests for you personally?
Yeah, I talked to the principal dancers a little bit about the sugar plum pas de deux. Um, Mostly about the two little solo movements. There's the duet. They were pretty happy with that. But then there's this little tarantella that the male has to do. That a tarantella, purely musically speaking, is a really fast dance. That's like that's a tarantella musically speaking, but dancing wise, choreography wise, it doesn't work. So it's you have to adjust. I was a little bit too fast initially, but they were happy with it after that.
Hmm.
And same thing with the dance of the sugar plum fairy, where it was just maybe a little bit too fast to start with. There were a couple of notes too from the choreographer for some of the bigger um, corps de ballet, like the snowflakes and the flowers. And there again, one of my biggest impressions from working, in the pit is that there are tempos that really make sense from a purely musical perspective, and there's are tempos that make sense from a dancing perspective, and they're
Correct.
not always the
Correct.
same. And so,
Right.
I suppose that depends also on what choreography you're doing as well. But so part of my internal task as a conductor was to kind of like to get those tempos that the dancers needed, and it almost felt like repressing my instincts, because there's snowflakes wants to go at a certain
Yeah.
pace, and if I did that I would just like kill the dancers on the stage, and so
Yeah.
I had to like really sort of suppress that. But then the danger is that it becomes sort of stodgy and unmusical when you do that. If you're just merely pressing the brakes on the tempo, you
Mhm.
have to find a way to still bring out all of the nuances of the music so that it's still musical and beautiful performance, but just at
Mhm.
a different pace. And I found that to be um, I think it was successful, but it was definitely a specific way of approaching conducting. You
Mhm.
can't just do what you want. You have to
Mhm.
like work in partnership with the dancers. Um,
we had a really good conductor my whole time in the company. And again, he would only come into our rehearsals usually. He would see each of the 5 or 6 couples, however many were doing it, maybe once. And it always amazed me because we were all a little bit different in our needs. I'm very tall. My partner was very tall. We needed things maybe a little bit slower than some of the shorter who liked it faster. And when we got on stage, our version was exactly how our version needed to be. And I never knew quite how. There's so many slight differences, but they knew how to, in their musically, they knew what to do, and how to adjust it for that couple or that couple, or that couple,
Yeah.
and it worked. It was very, very rare, if ever, that there was a tempo that was just, we can't do it. I mean, it just is, it's wrong. It never was that way. They were so good.
One of the things that I spent my time preparing for Nutcracker was trying to develop a feeling for what's like a comfortable tempo, like when a dancer is comfortable in their tempo and when they're not, for either it's too fast or too slow for them, so that I could kind of have that instinct, so that when I look up at the stage, I can tell, like, okay, is this like pushing them too hard? Is this like,
Can you see all the way towards the backup stage?
I could see most of the way. There was
Yeah.
like maybe the back third of the stage that I could see, like, from the knees up from there. So I couldn't see the footwork necessarily.
Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah, that was a bit of a challenge too. But I think, we talked a little bit, in the past, about how, like a dancer can kind of adjust to some degree, at least, to
Yeah.
different tempos. But one thing that maybe is more difficult for is when you have these things like the snowflakes or the flowers, where there's so many people dancing all together. Like, it's really got to be solid. You can't be making adjustments all the time, I
Right.
would think. I mean, that.
You can, and generally choreographically, the when any one of those big group numbers, those dancers are always so trained that you keep your eye on everyone else peripherally, that you work in unison. If somebody's faster, you go faster. If somebody's slower, you go slower. You can't do your own. You have to blend in, that it's homogenous, one solid group. Therefore, whatever the tempo is, everybody knows they have to stick with it. If it doesn't work for one dancer, they're going to have to adjust to the group. I mean, that is something that just choreographically is always harped on in rehearsal. And rehearsals are stopped oftentimes over and over and over and over again. No, 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 no. You're going too fast. No, no, no. You're going too slow. You have to stay with the group. Stay with the groups. Go back. Stay with the group. I mean, that is something that is drilled in. Again, because those rehearsals start in the fall. By the time that it rolls around to Nutcracker, pretty much that has gelled and hit set in, that most dancers, whatever the tempo is, they will stick with it as a group.
Yeah. So that's interesting how that method of rehearsal, something that I always kind of wondered about. And you see this in like movies and stuff about dance, where like people are talking to each other as they're doing the,
Oh,
the stuff, and
yeah.
and I mean, it takes quite a bit of communication in some way, like whether
Mhm.
that's just your body language or your awareness of each other. But are you actually like talking a little bit to each other? Do you have the opportunity for that up there? Or?
Um, rarely, rarely. Number one, a lot of times you're actually a little bit breathy. You're kind of breathing hard because a lot of the stuff is stamina. In ballet, you have to hold yourself elegantly. And that takes, you have to hold your core, and you get so tired, and that you're kind of breathing hard. So any extra vocal is just wasted energy, and it's kind of like inefficient. Oftentimes, yeah, I mean, my costume's gotten stuck a few times on another dancer's costume, and we had to just say, what do we do? But you can't do it while you're facing the audience. So you have to find some indiscreet way that when you're going around a corner that you say, what should we do? And I had one dancer say, rip it. And so I did. I had to literally, when we towards the back, I had to rip it, and so, I mean, or other times, we have a lot of IQs. And generally, a lot of times, the once you start, you just go on automatic and you hear the music and you go. Now, if there's a problem in any way, generally one person, I don't know how it happens, why it happens, one person will just, the man or the woman or whomever, if you're working with somebody, they will take the lead and the other person just follows. So going into whatever the new tempo needs to be. I was doing with Leslie, my sugar plum, we did many ballets together. We were doing a piece from a woman from Canada who was singing live during the thing. And halfway through, she started going, and the song stopped. But we were dancing, we had choreographic moves to the lyrics of the song, and she started coughing. And Leslie, she just said, keep going. And so we kept going, but by the time she resumed her lyrics, because she coughed for, I think, a solid like 5 seconds, but we were 5 seconds down the road in our choreography. We were completely off from that point on. We just kept going, and it just was not the choreography that fit with the lyrics, but what can you do, Yeah. So usually you don't talk, and a problem that Leslie and I had is nobody could make me laugh like Leslie, and vice versa. And oftentimes we actually couldn't say anything because one wrong look, and we often thought we were going to be fired because we were just so ready to burst out laughing about something that one of us would either note or see, or some absurd situation. One time we were guesting somewhere, and there was a woman who was in charge, and she had a very peculiar last name, and all the students, including the adults, called her Miss So-and-so, and I won't even say the name. But to Leslie and I, it was so strange that these adults who are, I think, older than her were still calling her Miss So-and-so rather than just her name. Yeah. And unbeknownst to us, she was one of the mice. And all of a sudden, she came out, and right before the snow, and Leslie and I were doing the snow, and I said, you do realize that's Miss So-and-so? And well, that did it. Leslie, we could not look at each other. And this duet, you're supposed to be looking at one another, because we were both laughing so hard, realizing that Miss So-and-so was that mouse, but whatever. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. It's, there's an awful lot of nonverbal communication going on in the pit as well.
I bet. I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, a conductor's job is nonverbal communication, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. But for example, there were times where there was a bunch of smoke from the production, and it's kind of rolled forward onto the stage and kind of got into the pit. And
correct.
There were a few seconds in the production where I could only see like halfway down the orchestra. Like the guys in the back were completely blocked off, and that's the times when you're really happy that the audience can't see your expressions, because there was a lot of snickering going on with that kind of stuff.
That's funny you should say that, because the ballets that I choreograph now, it's called actually a hazer that produces fog, and it adds such atmosphere to any kind of piece. And I'm always insistent, the more haze, more fog, and not even thinking like who else that's actually affecting. I just want it on stage that it looks like dreamy, like you're in some other world, and
Yeah.
it's
Well,
super interesting.
it's funny. That's almost exactly what the choreographer in Buffalo said. He just said, "Give
Yeah,
me more, 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 more."
yeah,
And I mean, it looks beautiful. It's
it
great. It's
does.
perfect for the scene. But
Yeah, you know what it does too. What it, the lights, they're up above, and they stream. It shows shafts of light that are always, because the fog, instead of just being light, it will show actual direct, which is always a super architecturally interesting lighting effect that fog will all of a sudden reveal that you
yeah,
don't necessarily see if there's no fog. And
yeah,
so when the fog comes in, you see these shafts, which is always, on a choreographic standpoint or a director standpoint, it always lends itself to make it even more interesting visually on stage.
yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating art, choreography, and you know, speaking of that, I was going to ask you as well about what makes for like a good let's keep it within Nutcracker. Like, what makes for a good choreography for that? Because you've got so much going on. You've got all of these like pantomime scenes in the first act, the party and the mice, the battle with the mice. I mean, that's got to be a big, tough, challenging thing to choreograph. And there's like, there's the side of it of like, what's idiomatic, like what feels good to dance, like what goes with the music, what's telling the story. There's a lot of different aspects to that. What just looks good aesthetically. How do you approach choreographing something like that?
Um, you probably have to initially block it, and the key thing too, what makes it good is your transitions between the scenes. How do you transition from the party scene into the battle scene into the snow scene of Act One? How do you transition between each of the divertissement? There has to be exits and entrances that make sense. And that's a difficult thing choreographically to do. Also, to, in my opinion, dance wise, keep the pace up versus down. You know, Anything that's 2 hours long, in some of the biggies like Swan Lake, they're 3 hours long. Nutcracker is only 2 hours long. But even for any of us to sit 2 hours, that's a challenge now. When my computer or my phone is acting up and I can't immediately get my website or my something, I like have no patience. Like, we don't have patience anymore. So if you don't keep the pace going quick, I think that is can be deadly
Yeah,
choreographically, which means you can't have just a lot of pantomime. The pantomime has to be paired with dance that kind of moves. So you've got stuff that's going on versus just indicating that people don't even sometimes understand what this pantomime gesture means. They're just seeing waving hands. So if
yeah,
you don't have something going on movement wise, I personally think becomes a little slow. You don't want to bore the audience. So, I mean, and it would be like if you were to play every section a little bit too slow, after a while, it's just like, oh my God, you start
yeah.
looking at your watch.
There's got to be like sort of an ebb and flow to that as well. Like,
Yeah.
the music, there are some moments that are slow, that are reflective, but other moments that are just really, just
Yeah,
kind
they have to move, and they have to move. They can't be slow as well. I
of.
mean, there's certain, like the tea divertissement and the candy cane or Russian. They're fast. They have to move brisk,
Yeah,
or else they'll just be, because prior to is the Arabian hot chocolate, and that is slow by nature. The music that is slow. So,
yeah,
yeah.
and it's got to be slow and kind of sexy, or otherwise it just doesn't have the right character.
Correct.
Um,
So, but it can't all be slow,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. One thing that we had once in a while, we had to make sort of concessions, um, to the kids that were dancing in terms of tempo. Like the angel scene in the top of Act Two. We're talking as mentioned, like very, very young, the youngest kids in the ballet, very, very small. And, that music kind of had to be slow for them.
Sure.
But then there was also like a good 2 minutes of it that's just in front of a lowered curtain. And so I didn't want that entire section to be just that sort of slower tempo, because then it would just take forever to get to
Forever.
the actual dancing. So, um, so well, first of all, I tried it all at a faster tempo my first rehearsal because I just kind of wanted to see what would happen. And the choreographer was like, no, they need a slower tempo than that. So I'm like, okay,
Good
fine.
try, but no.
Yeah, I just wanted to see what would happen. That's
Yeah.
fine. But then I had to find a place in the music where it would make sense to just pull back a little bit on the tempo before they come in with their choreography, so we could kind of get both that like natural motion when it's appropriate, and then to pull back a little bit when it's
Hard.
appropriate to the
Yeah.
choreography, and that's, I guess, that's why you have a conductor and why you have
Yeah.
musicians.
Easier with ballets that don't have kids in them. That's just professionals. Because, generally you would think an adult can adjust a lot easier than a child.
Yeah,
And the problem is too, which, we haven't really talked about or addressed, is you rehearse this thing, yes, all fall long, but you rehearse generally either with a recorded score, or you rehearse it with a pianist who is playing somewhere in the corner. But then everything could change with the live music, literally in the 11th hour, and something that you've rehearsed to at a certain tempo, a conductor can come in and have his version that he plays or she plays, and then it's literally a couple of nights before the performance. So lots of little things have to occur. Generally, somehow, I don't know, it always all works out.
yeah. Well, you have to be kind of flexible on the stage, right? I mean,
Yeah,
because you have to
for
be aware
sure.
of the fact that, you know even if you're dealing with a live orchestra, if somehow you had a live orchestra playing for every rehearsal in the studio, even
It's still going to
then,
be, even then.
it's
Yeah.
not going to be exactly the same every
Correct.
time. It's each time's a little different. So, yeah, one of the things I noticed, when I went to the studio in Buffalo, is that they were doing it with recording. They didn't have a pianist, and the recording that they had was Gergiev with Mariinsky Theater, and Gergiev is renowned for very fast tempos,
Hmm.
and so like his tempos for like the battle scene were so fast, like, and I was, in a way, I was actually really happy to hear that, because I'm like, okay, well, I can't be too fast in this scene, that because I
Yeah.
can't.
Well, Dan, let me ask you something. Like, if you were a guest conductor, you didn't hypothetically know this orchestra. What if they're just not able to play it fast? Like, or are they?
Yeah, well, I mean, in that case, and actually, we got fairly close, because I like the fast tempo for the battle. I think it
Mhm.
makes for a lot of
Yeah, I agree.
excitement. um, but and it makes a lot of that like fight choreography look more natural when it's faster. If it's
Mhm.
too slow, then it's just kind of like,
Pantomime.
yeah, and it doesn't have that action to it. So I liked that, but it's tough music. It's not that easy, and it's not necessarily. I mean, Buffalo Philharmonic is a great orchestra, and they did a great job with it. But and we got most of the way to the Gergiev tempo. But I think in order to get quite as fast as he got, you would have to have more time to rehearse it. Like it's just, you know it takes some work in the orchestra to get the response up to that point.
A
Um,
lot of coffee.
yeah, a lot of coffee, a lot of coffee, and just, it's a technique thing, and it's a response and listening. When you're in the pit, things sound different. When they were recording it. Well, I mean, Mariinsky Theater's got an amazing pit, and amazing acoustics, that helps. Um, but I imagine they were recording it in some kind of a studio where they can hear really well. And when you can hear really well, then it's easier to play faster and play together as an orchestra. Um, so all of those things kind of factor into the tempo that you can achieve for the faster stuff. But it was I was happy to see that they were rehearsing with a fast tempo though, because the ballet, because that meant that I didn't feel like I had to be careful about going too fast. I felt like I could basically go as fast as I could, and they would be already used to a tempo like that, so they'd be fine. I think in general, conducting faster is a little bit easier, and playing faster is a little bit easier to achieve in a musical way than slower. Like the Waltz of the Snowflakes, it has sort of a groove at a certain tempo that works really well. And if it goes below that, you can do it and it's fine, but it's hard to get it to flow and to sound musical. And so it's got a real sort of delicacy.
And that actually is harder on the dancers to do slower.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for that particular choreography, for a dancer to move slower, it looks laden. It doesn't look light, so.
Yeah. It's amazing how nuanced, how close those tolerances are sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Some of the tempos that I was clocking, and I have a little app on my phone where I can tap and see and then it would tell me what the tempo is, which was very useful. But sometimes, like, the difference between what was too fast or what the dancers wanted was like 2 clicks a minute. The difference between 60 and 58, and that's a very, very fine.
Because if you are going for a turn, sometimes you need an extra second to give what we call a plie, to give a bend before you can go up into the turn. And if it's too fast, you don't have even that second, and you just go, you don't get properly placed versus that kind of thing. So, and sometimes it's literally splitting hairs. Yeah.
It's always about like the momentum and the conservation of energy, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. How similar. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of similarity to how instruments work and how the orchestra works. When you can't just like start a violin from nothing. Like there's a certain like air.
There's a movement. Yeah. There's a flow. And if we can circle back a little bit, when you're talking about companies that either rehearse and some perform with recorded music, it was, I count myself as so lucky that not just the Nutcracker, but every season that we worked with the Philadelphia Orchestra, to dance to live music, even with the unpredictability and the not the in a recording it will always be the same, you will know the tempo, but there are going to be fluctuations with the live music, but it was always beyond rich, to do it with live music versus recorded music. Again, that collaboration. I think I mentioned to you before, as a dancer, a lot of times, that as thrilling as it is, there's a little bit of a fear factor. The curtain goes up and the spotlight's on you, and people have bought tickets. You better do good. And somehow, that comfort of knowing you're not the only one performing was always somehow comforting. That you saw other people, the musicians, the conductor, they're also performing in that moment, and you knew that you were not in this alone, that you were part of this collaborative effort. And in that sense, it was a little more reassuring somehow, and not quite as scary versus if you're just alone, exposed out there on a stage, and people paid a lot of money to see you, better do good. So like, okay.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things about ballet that I think is just so magical is that collaboration. This how many people, 75 people in the pit and dozens of people on stage. Um, and to say nothing of the stage hands and the scenery moving,
That's right.
and lighting
That's right.
people, and the choreographer and the teachers, and especially in the case when you've got kids and younger dancers, it's really a massive combined effort from all these people, um, and the result is just magical. Like when you finally all put it together and all the costumes are on and everything, and you get to
It's like baking a good cake.
yeah,
Hopefully you put all the right ingredients in, and hopefully it bakes just right, and then you can enjoy this amazing piece of cake.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, listen, this was super fun. And
Yeah, I agree. Always fun to talk with you.
likewise, and it's interesting to hear like a little bit more of the sort of behind the scenes of what's going
Mm.
on the stage.
And likewise to what's going on down below.
Yeah, yeah, it's unfortunately it's often like a little bit of a divide between the dancing portion and the musicians kind of uh, don't necessarily mingle all that much, and so this gives us a chance to kind of compare notes if nothing else.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Nice. Well,
But
good luck with your next ballet, and maybe if you do a ballet that I've done, maybe we'll repeat this little process.
yeah, I would love to. Yeah, and thanks so much for joining me, and
Absolutely, my pleasure.
good luck with the rest of your semester and the rest of your holiday season.
Yeah, have a good one.
All right,
Yeah,
cheers.
see you.